Get this through your head. Louis Vuitton is not for poor people. Hi YouTube, Autumn Beckman here. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. My channel is all about luxury on a budget, well, most of the time anyway. If you're into that sort of thing, please like the videos, subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell notification icon to be notified when I post a new video. So Louis Vuitton is not for poor people. Let's get this straight, y'all. I've received quite a few comments to this effect over the years that I've been on YouTube. One person even said that teachers should not have Louis Vuitton bags. I have notes and they say, "Insert laugh here." I got one of these comments fairly recently and it reminded me that we need to have a conversation about this. First of all, we all know that these comments say nothing about us, all about the people saying them. I know much of my audience is like me, where we cannot afford to go to Louis Vuitton and buy a new bag every few days, weeks, months even. Most of us do need to plan those purchases and save up for them. And if you can't afford to just go in and buy whatever you want, that's awesome. I wish I was you. Most of us live in a world where that's not possible. But these comments, they leave me with the impression that the people leaving them have a very narrow worldview and that they take luxury way too seriously. After all, like I've said before, these are just handbags. In response to these comments, I would make 2 points. Number one, people can do whatever they want with their money. If they want to buy Louis Vuitton and they can afford to, or they can save up and buy it, then they have absolutely every right to do so. That should be obvious. The poor people part of these comments is just totally ignorant. And point two, I would counter that Louis Vuitton, in many respects, is not actually luxury, and that it is not intended for wealthy people. What? Explain, you say. I will. Point one, there's something in psychology called upward and downward comparison. This is where you compare yourself to people who you perceive to be better or worse off than you in some way. There are different reasons, motivations, and results for doing this. Sometimes this results in feeling better about yourself. So perhaps you're diagnosed with an incurable disease that you have to live with for the rest of your life. And it's a terrible situation. But to help yourself feel better about what you have to deal with, you downward compare your situation to someone who you perceive as being worse off than you, perhaps someone with a terminal illness. And then you can look at them and say, well, compared to them, my situation isn't so bad. Sometimes these comparisons make you feel worse about yourself. For example, I've certainly dealt with this. I bet many of you have too. If you have issues with your weight, many people, let's say you're overweight, or at least you perceive yourself that way. Many people will compare themselves to people who are thinner than they are, people who have more of the body ideal that they have in their own heads. And it makes them feel lesser than the other person. It makes them feel bad about themselves for having that hamburger last night. So you compare yourself to someone you see as better, and that makes you feel worse in this situation. Sometimes the comparisons can be aspirational. So for example, maybe there's someone at work who you admire, and that inspires you, motivates you to work harder and to achieve more at work and achieve a higher status. Some people, however, use upward and downward comparison to judge other people in negative ways. And of course, that's what's happening here. The people who have commented that poor people shouldn't have luxury items are saying that poor people, however they define that. In my What is Luxury video, we talked about how words like poor are relative. But they're saying that poor people are somehow not as good or not as worthy as wealthy people. Most of us, however, understand that that is simply not true. Point two. Personally, I love things that change my perspective. Studying social psychology changed the way I see human behavior. Being able to travel to Italy changed the way I perceive the world. This book, Deluxe, How Luxury Lost Its Luster by Dana Thomas, changed the way I view luxury. The book starts with a history of luxury. I'm going to put it down instead of just holding it up the whole time. It starts with a history of luxury, what luxury used to be, and how it's changed and what it's become. The author discusses changes in manufacturing, how things used to be made by hand by artisans, and how now these fashion houses have shifted to mass producing their items in low-wage countries like China, for example, and even how they can do most of their manufacturing in a cheap labor factory like that, but then put the final bits together in France, Italy, Spain, so they can put those made in those places tags in their bags. Deceptive. And what struck me most in this book is when she talks about the audiences for these luxury products in modern times. I had always assumed that a big part of the price of these luxury items, the outrageous prices, had to do with the quality of the materials that they used and the labor that the artisans making them by hand were being paid well. And all these things add up, and that results in expensive bags. And of course the brand name has something to do with it too. And I've always assumed that because they had to have these high prices, that their audience would be wealthy people, just like it was when these fashion houses started up and started becoming famous. And that's how a so-called luxury brand was born and carried all the mystique and exclusivity and aspirational status that goes along with that. Before I started buying these bags, I assumed that all of this was still the case, that the target audience for these companies like Louis Vuitton was wealthy clientele. And certainly it still is. Who doesn't want wealthy clientele? But as this book points out, their target audience is often not the wealthy, but the middle class, us. Though I had never thought of that, once I read it, it all made sense. And the first thing I thought of was the many times that I've been in a movie theater waiting for a movie to start and there are all those ads before them, and the many times I've seen an ad for Louis Vuitton in a movie theater. That's not where you advertise to wealthy people. It is where you advertise to the middle class. Louis Vuitton markets their products as if they're targeting a wealthy class. This one ad in particular I can remember was about people traveling the world with their Louis Vuitton luggage and handbags, but the ad itself was directed at the middle class. It just represented the wealthy, which is who the middle class want to be, which is who everybody wants to be, right? We all want to be wealthy. We aspire to the ideals that are espoused in these luxury ads, but in our current positions we still have to save, a lot of us, in order to purchase those items. And that's what they want, because we are a huge market, the middle class. And quite a lot of us aspire to be more. And that's why the Speedy and the Neverfull and many of the other canvas bags, which are the Vuitton's lower end bags, even though they're still expensive, they're the entry-level bags. This is why we see them everywhere. Not because so many of us can afford them, but because they've targeted us for this. And they've priced the items in a way that we can save a little and afford them. It's a piece of luxury that we can attain. And for us, it's a taste of that wealthy luxury ideal. I also think that this is one of the reasons that Louis Vuitton's quality has dropped so much from the days when it actually was luxury and intended for the wealthy. With many exceptions, Louis Vuitton has been getting away with these quality issues because we keep buying their bags. Despite solid brass hardware being replaced with plated hardware that rubs off, sometimes in a few weeks from what I've seen from some people. Color chipping, canvas thinning, canvas cracking, glazing melting and cracking, and the poor customer service and lack of consistency when you try to get information from different people across the company. I even heard in a Facebook group, and I don't know that this is true because it's hearsay, but I'll throw it out there because I have witnessed it firsthand in a Louis Vuitton store. I heard in this Facebook group that the managers, the SAs at Vuitton are trained when someone brings in a bag with a problem to blame the customer for the problem and tell them that they mistreated the bag, mishandled the bag, and it's their fault that there's damage to the bag. I've seen a few YouTubers say that this has happened to them. I've also seen plenty of examples where Vuitton does take responsibility, and this is one of the things I'm talking about with consistency across the company. There is none. I've also heard from people who are much more knowledgeable about Chanel than I am that Chanel quality has been declining. So if you're into Chanel, something to be aware of. Let me also say, is this going to stop me from buying Vuitton? No. Not if there's something that I really want. Will it stop me from buying something that I know is likely to be defective? Absolutely. There are quite a few items that I like from Vuitton that I won't buy because of quality issues. It's one of the reasons I tend to stick to the pre-loved market, where I can have a bag that's already been used for a few years so we know if there are issues with it. Am I trying to convince you not to buy Louis Vuitton? No, I'm not. Just making you aware of some of these issues so that you don't go in and buy a bag or whatever other item just because it's Louis Vuitton and thinking because they have this history of being a luxury brand and high quality will align with that. When you go shop with any of these luxury brands these days, treat them as if they're a brand new company. I've come not to expect super high quality from the new items, at least the ones that I've looked at Vuitton. And people say, well, that's just the canvas items, the leather items that are more expensive are going to be better made. That's not true either. I looked at an Empreinte Speedy a few months ago. I showed y'all pictures of this in another video. It was all wonky and crooked. How that got past any kind of inspection process, if they even have an inspection process, that's unclear. I'll never know. But that bag should not have been on the floor. So don't be fooled by the brand name and the hype and the history and the reputation. Ask yourself if whatever item you're thinking of buying, if it wasn't made by that company, would you still want it? Would you still think the quality was worth the price tag? Or do like I do and generally stick to Preloved? Because us poor folks, that Louis Vuitton is for us.